In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released a report of calls to action, which include number 57. We call upon federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. This will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism.
Canada, as a settler colonial state, was founded on notions of white as the superior, more civilized race of human beings, which justified a lot of the occupation and was the base foundation for policies like the residential school policies. And those policies and those thoughts carry forward today. We're not talking about a distant past.
We're always aware that there is a level of ignorance and racism that exists, kind of a constant, and you see that throughout history.
Back in this 1970, the university published a very racist article in one of the student papers, and thankfully there was a public outcry, and the student association was formed at the time.
When you go to a school every day, you want to feel safe there, and just knowing that racism exists towards you and your people, it's very hurtful.
One of our Indigenous students here was sitting in a class. This student wrote that in the class, her classmates and her professor, they were discussing the benefits of wiping out 1,000 Indians from South Indian Lake, and they were discussing that in her presence.
I started to encounter the racism, and I could see it. It was so overt because I just put up a slide saying improving the educational outcomes for Indigenous youth, and I would see teachers roll their eyes and get up and walk out of the room.
I would say that there are lots of struggles in terms of dealing with racism, but also, frankly, real resistance to the commitment with Indigenous peoples.
When we changed the system, decolonized, after a little while, they go right back and recolonize again.
There's an Indian Act that controls First Nations people in this country, and people don't even know about it.
Recently, the teepee that stands behind the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation was heavily vandalized. It's very clear what that teepee is. It's a very visible symbol of Indigenous culture.
I think that it's really a literacy in Indigenous content that we need to move to in universities, but also in public service.
There is no Indigenous pedagogy without Indigenous peoples, and the ways that we practice those as a people is ceremony. Ceremony is not just a spiritual endeavor, but it's a mental, academic. So this framework, this institution has not often seen our work as intellectual, but it is very intellectual. It's Indigenous pedagogy in action.
Our path to reconciliation, I would say, is a difficult one.
It's a path that requires courage and love and honesty.
It's an ongoing process, but you can see it in moments on this campus that's really beautiful and important.
Part of decolonization, part of resurgence and reconciliation is being able to arm our students with the tools that they need to reclaim their identities as Indigenous people.
I think that the heart and the spirit of each student is the same, and that they're fighting for something really important, a reflection of, their ancestors' dreams.
It's my hope that people will see this as a beginning rather than an end. Will understand that it's a journey, it takes time, but it's worth the commitment, and that the future world that we can build for all Canadians and for Canada is predicated on finding a better way. And sometimes, as we all know, that means even we professors have to learn a little thing or two.